Joining me right now is Scott Dunaway of the Texas Fantasy Sports Alliance. Scott, good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Chad. Thanks for having me on this morning.
Absolutely. The reason we have you on today is because of some legislation that Texas lawmakers could look at during this 85th Texas legislative session to make fantasy sports gambling legal in Texas, correct?
Well, I would tell you that is correct on some levels. That Representative Raymond from South Texas has introduced a bill that actually clarifies the legality of fantasy sports after there was some confusion and a gray area created last year by an opinion issued by the Attorney General's office. So we've seen 10 other states take this move to clarify the legality of fantasy sports in their states, and we're hoping Texas is going to be the next one.
Yeah, this has been an ongoing issue in many states as fantasy sports, number one, has grown, but also some of these websites where you can go online, pay a little bit of money, and really it's daily fantasy betting, but also some gambling in some season long. Everyone has heard of some of the different websites that are out there. Where are we right now as far as the legality of fantasy sports betting, and in your opinion, where does it need to go?
Absolutely. So Two great questions. So the first one is, in January of 2016, the Attorney General of the state of Texas issued an opinion from his office that he believed that the legislature needed to provide clarity surrounding fantasy sports because the law was antiquated, it was outdated, and it didn't contemplate technology inserting itself into the fantasy sports realm and allowing players to compete for prizes as quickly as they do in today's environment. And you reference some of the daily fantasy sports like sites like DraftKings and FanDuel as examples.
Right.
So when it comes to the use of the word gambling, as you said a second ago, I think that House Bill 1457 that we are firmly behind as the bill that will clarify this issue states that fantasy sports is a game of skill. And I think that any of your listeners that have played fantasy sports would agree that there is a tremendous amount of skill that's involved in this contest. Certainly there is some chance involved, as with any contest, whether sports or otherwise. But fantasy is a game of skill in the state, and we need to clarify that in the legislature so that players can continue. Right now, fantasy sports in Texas is not illegal. We just have an Attorney General's opinion that says that he believes it needs to be clarified by the legislature, and that's exactly what we're pursuing.
Well, how and you know the state, and you have Republicans that and Democrats on. You have people on both sides of the aisle that aren't too keen on expansion of gambling as a whole. I'm not talking about fantasy sports, but just as a whole in this state, they're not too keen on it. This, as a clarification, though, is a little bit different. So what do you think the chances are? What are you hearing from lawmakers as far as this being clarified, and especially in this legislative session?
Absolutely. Well, I would tell you that the bill is introduced, 1457, as mentioned, enjoys tremendous support from joint authors on both sides of the aisle. Richard Raymond, a Democrat, Edmund Kemple, committee chair, Republican, Rodney Anderson, committee chair, Republican, James White, also Republican, Abel Herrero, Democrat. I mean, when it comes to talking bipartisanship on a bill, we are in a good spot on that. So I think that all of these legislators, along with a number of other ones, have recognized that there are personal liberties that Texans enjoy in this state. In playing fantasy sports, whether football, basketball, NASCAR, or golf, or any other number of opportunities, this is not something that the government should be sticking its nose in. Texans have believed that fantasy sports have been legal for decades, and now the legislature is going to step up and say they're not. That'd be really inconsistent with I think that the way the legislature has performed in the past, and that's what we're hoping to educate on.
I'm all for fantasy sports gambling. If people want to do it, go ahead and do it. And I mean, to me, it just this is, like you said, an individual liberty issue, but also, I guess there are protections in place, and the only arguments that I am guessing you're hearing from lawmakers or that lawmakers have about this is, one, if they have an ideological issue with just gambling in general, but also maybe the worry that kids could get access and spend a whole lot of money? I mean, what's the backlash, or what's the anti-attitude towards fantasy sports and placing bets on these websites? What's the against argument?
Yeah, so a couple of things is there are a number of consumer protections that are put into place with House Bill 1457, and we think that those are important. We think that there are good best practices for all consumers, and other states have looked at those as well. So we think that those are going to be a number of different items to integrate into that. It puts in a minimum age of 18 years old as an example. House Bill 1457 does, and we believe that that's an important threshold from the Texas Fantasy Sports Alliance to follow. And something that we can endorse and get behind. To focus a little bit on maybe the opposition that you raised, candidly, a lot of lawmakers have told us that they're hearing more from constituents on fantasy sports issues than they are on other more traditional issues that kind of turn up the volume in their offices, which is encouraging for us. I would say this, Chad, is if the state is going to take affirmative action on fantasy sports to clarify them, then that's a great step in the right direction. And the reason I say that they should do that is because this is what technology has created. For decades, Texans have been showing up at lakes and on the coast on the weekend, and they've been playing a very similar prize contest to fantasy sports. They prepare, they bring their equipment, and they're showing up for a fishing tournament. They pay their entry fee to an administrator that's running the tournament. They go out, they fish, they work hard. Maybe they're in the right hole, maybe they're not. And when they come back, the winner is the one that takes home that prize. It's the exact same format as a fantasy football, basketball, golf, or NASCAR contest. It's just done in a different venue. And I think that the education curve that we have ahead of us for lawmakers is what's really going to be important this legislative session.
Right. Scott Dunaway, spokesperson for the Texas Fantasy Sports Alliance. You can visit their website at txfantasysportsalliance.com. Scott, what other, if people are all for fantasy sports and wanting to get all this clarified and, move on from this big question mark that's over Texas lawmakers as far as fantasy sports goes, what would you encourage them to do?
Absolutely. Well, first off, we've had over 65,000 people contact the legislature already through our action tool, and I would encourage folks to visit the website that you just mentioned, txfantasysportsalliance.com. Contact your legislators. Write letters to the editor. Let elected officials know that Texans play fantasy sports. It's an important personal liberty. We expect them to protect it, and that we all want to serve as resources. So you can sign up on the website and go beyond writing letters and let us know that you want to do more, and we'll definitely be in touch.
All right. Scott, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad.
Have a good one. That's Scott Dunaway talking a little fantasy sports and Texas lawmakers. It's it's not all just bathroom bills down in Austin.